Bond. James Bond.
James Bond has an interesting relationship with fandom. Spanning nearly 60 years and dipping its toe into a 7th decade, the ultimate spy's legacy is largely incidental. If you're a Bond fan, it can depend on where you were born, which Bond was the first one you saw in theaters, which Bond was your dad's favorite, and who knows what else. The result is a filmography that's pretty fragmented, with 6 different actors traversing several different eras, so depending on which Bond fan you ask, the question of how should I watch the Bond movies elicits very different answers. My personal favorite answer is, you should watch all the Bond movies in chronological order as if he were really one guy the whole time.
Shaken, not stirred.
007 made his bones over the years through largely standalone adventures. Daniel Craig's Bond is the only one that's had a legitimately continuous story, save for the back-to-back appearances of Jaws and Roger Moore's Tenure. But what if you, like me, wanted to assume that all 24 movies and all 6 of the actors played the same guy start to finish? What viewing order could possibly accomplish that? How could all the recastings and side characters and villainous plot threads be kept coherent? I'm glad you asked, friend, because here follows all the fanfic, logic leaps, and general delusions you'll need to entertain to watch the entire Bond franchise in quote-unquote chronological order. Casino Royale offers the only true origin story of Her Majesty's secret agent, so we have to start here. James Bond receives his 00 status from Judi Dench's M after a grainy black and white cold open. Then he celebrates by shooting up an embassy. Classic James. After a trip to the Bahamas and the most exciting night of poker ever, we get to the end of the film where, for the first time ever, he utters his signature line.
The name's Bond. James Bond.
And we hear the Bond theme, for the purposes of this chronology, for the first time ever. Quantum of Solace picks up something like 20 minutes after the end of Casino Royale. The enigmatic Mr. White is still in Bond's trunk, and the bitter aftertaste of his heartbreak at the hands of Vesper Lynd is still lingering. Happily, a trip down to Bolivia to thwart Dominic Green's honestly ahead-of-its-time plot about controlling an entire country's water supply is just the diversion he needs until he finds closure. He wraps up Quantum of Solace as a hardened agent of MI6, ready to work alongside Judi Dench's M once more. But we can't go to Craig's next film because in Skyfall we get this.
You know the rules of the game. You've been playing it long enough.
Which doesn't make that much sense because he just became 007 like 3 weeks ago. So when did he turn into an old dog?
Old dog. New tricks.
After Quantum of Solace, we start to see him turn into an old dog with the third stop in our chronology, Goldfinger. Sean Connery is Bond at his coldest, and while Goldfinger doesn't set up all the things that would make Bond so famous, it does set up the all-important formula. An outlandish villain with an equally outlandish plot and a still more outlandish henchman. But what about M? Here we find Bernard Lee as the man atop MI6 in Judi Dench's place. Let's say this is because Judi Dench's M has been called away to head up Station H for a time, and Bernard Lee is the new M in her stead, bringing with him the ever-faithful Ms. Moneypenny played by Lois Maxwell.
Oh, the only gold I know about is the kind you wear. You know, on the third finger of your left hand.
In Bond's following 3 adventures, he begins to encounter what will become his chief rival, Ernst Stavro Blofeld, and the special executive for counterintelligence, terrorism, revenge, and extortion, or Spectre if you don't want to just revel in that acronym.
For your sake, I hope so.
In Dr. No, Bond thwarts a plan to thwart a space launch, an operation bankrolled by Spectre. From Russia with Love is a revenge plot devised by Spectre to get back at Bond himself. And a footnote here, these movies have to be screened back-to-back in this order specifically because of Bond's London-based love interest who appears in both films, who, in addition to having just the worst name, is actually responsible for Bond's catchphrase.
Trench. Sylvia Trench.
Bond. James Bond.
But not in this chronology. James has said that loads of times before. Thunderball is next because it's another encounter with Spectre, but not with Blofeld. It's important that they've not met face to face yet, but by very slowly stopping the underwater theft of some nukes in the Bahamas, Bond is proving to be quite a thorn in his side. So much so that Blofeld, who prides himself on operating under the radar, decides to take a break from executing counterintelligence, terrorism, revenge, and extortion in order to regroup and strike at him later. In reality, a long legal battle kept the franchise from being able to use Spectre or the character Ernst Stavro Blofeld until the most recent film.
You're a hard man to kill, Blofeld.
Resulting in a long stretch of Bond films without his arch-rival. That same stretch of films, however, used most of the same supporting cast, so in this chronology, I'm happy to fanfiction my way into an excuse for Blofeld's absence by moving on to Roger Moore. With Spectre laying low, Bond also has a chance to relax a little bit in a smoother, Roger Moore-flavored package. He's forced Spectre into hiding, so much so that he legally can't even mention them. But he is allowed to go about the day-to-day business of taking the cases as they come. And after his Jamaican adventure in Live and Let Die, Bond must next take on Christopher Lee's excellent Francisco Scaramanga in The Man with the Golden Gun, and then go to space to stop Hugo Drax in Moonraker. The important thing here is that Bernard Lee is still M, Lois Maxwell is still Moneypenny, and Desmond Llewellyn is still Q. So that means we're dipping back into the Connery era while that cast is still holding down the fort at MI6. The high-profile nature of going to space and saving the world a few times plays havoc with the secret agent's ability to do their job. So, step one is to fake your own death.
Well, now that you're dead, perhaps some of your old friends will pay a little less attention to you for a while.
So the next movie up is You Only Live Twice. Bond finds his way to Japan where he pretends to take a wife while hiding out in a fishing village, then to a super iconic volcano lair and an enormous Austin Powers-inspiring showdown with his old pal Blofeld, who's decided he's done laying low.
Goodbye, Mr. Bond.
Even though James gets the better of him here, Blofeld comes right back in Diamonds Are Forever. If we're looking at the dynamic between Bond and Blofeld as a sort of Batman-Joker through line to this entire experiment, this movie begins to show the cracks in Blofeld's psyche. It's, frankly, a little bananas. He creates doubles of himself and changes his appearance.
Double jeopardy, Mr. Bond.
Blofeld in the film is played by Charles Gray, who, in the previous entry on this watch list, played a different character, a contact of Bond's in Tokyo named Henderson. So this means that Blofeld made himself look like Bond's old ally, which is a dastardly move indeed. But in addition to Blofeld mimicking his old pals, Bond might be starting to run into a lady problem. Perhaps getting fake married in You Only Live Twice has him eager to try out the real thing. Enter Contessa Teresa Tracy de Vincenzo, daughter of a European crime boss. A chance meeting on the beach leads to romance, which in turn accidentally leads to Blofeld. James finds himself face to face with Telly Savalas in a Swiss allergy institute while also surrounded by beautiful women from around the world. On Her Majesty's Secret Service is all Spectre and Blofeld all the time, with Bond discovering a plot to brainwash the women into spreading weaponized bacteria to their home countries, which fits with the crazy schemes Blofeld is resorting to these days. By the end of the movie, Bond has defeated Blofeld once again and has even married Tracy. As the newlyweds motor off to their honeymoon, Blofeld and his right-hand woman, Irma Bunt, murder Tracy in an Alpine drive-by, and George Lazenby's only outing as Bond sees the character's first real tragedy since Vesper's death in Venice. So, here comes a hard cut to Tracy's grave, and a less whimsical Roger Moore than when we last saw him having sex in orbit. For Your Eyes Only was, in real life, a more grounded course correction from the bonkers Moonraker, which was itself a reaction to the success of Star Wars. But in this chronologically perfect watch order, the film is, in addition to the graveside visit, a perfect follow-up to On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Firstly, he immediately gets to kill Blofeld. Kind of. And if you're wondering why the film never says his name out loud or even shows his face, it's because the lawsuit keeping the franchise from actually using Blofeld was still in effect. So maybe in our version of events, this actually isn't Blofeld. But this dialed-back outing for Bond matches the mood of a recently widowed man. He's older, a little slower, and not quite the womanizer he's been to date. In short, this is as close to mourning as we get with 007. This is also an M-less Bond movie, as Bernard Lee passed away before he could shoot his scenes for the film, and they opted to rewrite the movie instead of recasting in a hurry. Of course, in our chronology, we don't know that, so The Spy Who Loved Me is the final Roger Moore film to feature both Bernard Lee as M, so in essence he's still in charge in spite of not appearing in the previous film, and a mention of his dead wife.
Many lady friends, but married only once. Wife killed.
All right, you've made your point.
But also, Bond seems to have more distance from Tracy's death, as The Spy Who Loved Me is pre-Moonraker peak Roger Moore charm, from the Union Jack parachute to the perfectly timed cork pop. There's also zero Spectre and Blofeld, although apparently they tried initially to incorporate him as the villain, but yet another injunction forced them, in the real world, toward Carl Stromberg's oceanic-obsessed bad guy.
Now you will pay the penalty.
The film also briefly introduces an Admiral Hargraves, played by Robert Brown, who is clearly in line for a promotion. But wrapping up The Spy Who Loved Me with yet another tryst with a spy has to have taken its toll on the man. So next we move into Timothy Dalton's run. The Living Daylights and License to Kill features a return to the colder side of Bond with just a dash of Roger Moore's empathy left over. Meanwhile, Desmond Llewellyn is still trusty old Q, but Robert Brown got that promotion and is the new M for these two films, who brings with him Caroline Bliss as his Moneypenny. By the way, I think this also indicates that Moneypenny is a codename just like M or Q. But, real-world note here, these films were also made in the 80s at the height of the AIDS crisis. Bond's sex life was very intentionally kept to an absolute minimum. It's also clear the world is changing, and the powers that be have decided to bring Judi Dench's M back from Station H to shepherd in the new era. Pierce Brosnan's tenure as Bond runs the gamut from legit good with Goldeneye to tsunami surfing bad with Die Another Day, although fans of Bond's campier moments will say that film has actually aged quite well. But in terms of watching the franchise in chronological order as though he's one guy the whole time, they all occupy the same space. Goldeneye definitely comes first as it establishes a new order of business with Judi Dench's M as well as Samantha Bond as Dame Judy's personal Moneypenny. It should also be pointed out that Desmond Llewellyn's Q makes his final appearance in The World Is Not Enough, passing the torch briefly to John Cleese, who, in spite of his best efforts, was never really going to work out. Which brings us all the way back to Daniel Craig. Like I said 19 movies ago, it was always silly how Bond was a brand new 00 in the first two movies, then a grizzled vet old dog who can't learn new tricks in the third film. But watching it this way, oh boy does this put some miles on the guy. He's squared off with supervillains, saved the world countless times, been married, widowed, and mourned. No wonder he's playing drinking games with scorpions as part of his retirement plan. But the resurfacing of Javier Bardem's Silva to seek vengeance for M's now fairly recent transgressions in Station H coaxes Bond back to MI6, where he meets John Cleese's young replacement, Ben Whishaw's Q, who, after years of dealing with aged Desmond Llewellyn, comes as a bitter pill to swallow for our old dog James. The battle against Silva takes James all the way back to his ancestral home and ultimately leads to the death of Dench's M and her replacement, Ralph Fiennes. And oh look, all of a sudden Eve's name is Moneypenny.
Eve Moneypenny.
Cause seriously, it's a codename in this universe. But Bond is ready to get back to work, right? And back to work he gets, but still taking orders from his old M. He dives into the resurgence of the shadowy group that he thought he took down way back in Quantum of Solace, but it's not just a revival of Quantum, but a revival of Spectre. And sitting at the head of the table is his dear old adopted brother, Franz Oberhauser. Now, say what you will about Spectre as a movie, but whether you liked it or not, there's a way to watch this movie that makes it better. According to the film, Franz, who hated James because their father loved him more despite being adopted, rose through the world of organized crime to create Spectre, all in the interest of ruining James's life, and he pulled the name Ernst Stavro Blofeld from his mother's side of the family. But the problem with that is, the name is meaningless to James. Star Trek Into Darkness made the same mistake with Khan. In this perfect chronology, however, Franz hates his adopted brother so much that he renames his criminal empire and even changes his own name to something that specifically digs deeper, more intimately into his brother's psyche, with the revelation that Bond had fallen into Blofeld's orbit as a child. The man that took him in as an orphan, Hans Oberhauser, was in fact married to the Blofelds. How crushing is that? But also, like Casino Royale's unique origin story, Spectre is the only film that offers what could be a bit of finality to his story. He literally drives off into the sunset with Madeline Swan. But wait, the astute viewer is asking, 14 minutes into this video. Pretty sure you left out a couple Roger Moore films. And to that I say, of course I did, because it's time to watch them now. Roger Moore's final 2 turns as 007 are, in all honesty, some of my favorites. The campiness is so much fun to revisit, in part because of the killer theme in A View to a Kill, but mostly because of how old Bond looks. Like Roger Moore in his 50s old. So what if, after driving off into retirement with Madeline Swan, Bond gets that itch again to go out into the world and save it from those who would twirl their mustaches? The man has spent his entire life saving the world, only now to be asked to settle down. Sure, retirement was his idea, but expecting him to behave after the shit he's done and seen, it's even enough for him to go so mad for the old days, he imagines previous M's and Q's and Moneypennies on his way out the door for what amounts to an unstable, flashback-riddled, almost 60-year-old former spy embarking on unsanctioned missions. Imagine old man Roger Moore, and if you want to, here's a way Connery's off-brand Never Say Never Again would fit in as well, doing all of this while he's got Madeline Swan waiting for him at home. What lies is he telling her? What business trips does he say he's going on? Well, at some point, that all catches up with him and Madeline bolts, leaving him alone in retirement in Jamaica with, according to the trailer for No Time to Die, a bad knee. And hopefully No Time to Die isn't just a big remake of Dr. No, because that might make me rethink this whole thing. Also, if you're interested, the 1967 psychedelic Nobody Behind the Wheel adaptation of Casino Royale would fit perfectly here at the end, with David Niven's retired James Bond being the continuation of the character, but honestly, you don't really have to watch that. But in the meantime, you've got half a century's worth of super spy adventure to watch with a very specific set of instructions to keep in mind at all times.